Here we have a sine and cosine function that have been transformed. So let's begin by describing the transformations that have taken place. A couple things that I'm going to want to note. If I ever have a negative a value, a negative multiplier of the sine or cosine, that's going to have the effect of reflecting our graph over the x-axis. So this graph will be reflected or flipped over the x-axis. Also, I notice that I have a number being subtracted or added to my function. That's going to have the effect of moving the graph up or down, and specifically when we start graphing these in a moment, or in another video, we're going to see that that actually is going to move our midline up or down, which will affect what our graph looks like. So there's the two transformations I'm looking for this first function. Next up, they asked me to find the amplitude of the function. Well, as we did in the previous videos, the amplitude is still our a value, but remember, our amplitude is always the absolute value of that a value. Amplitude can't be negative. So our amplitude is still just going to be 2.5, not negative 2.5. So from that midline, the graph is going to go up 2.5 and down 2.5. Okay? The last part of this problem is going to ask us to describe the range, the highest value and the lowest value, y value, that my graph gets to. To do that, I'll show you a couple ways to do that. First, I'll just give you a formula for this, and the second one we'll take a look more visually what's going on, and you can try either way and see what makes more sense to you. So my range is going to be found like this. The wave is going to kind of alternate above and below the midline. So I'm going to consider the midline sort of like the center of my graph. And then I'm going to go up and down from there a distance of the amplitude. So really I'm going to take the midline and then add or subtract the amplitude. And again, we'll take a look in the next example more visually if that helps you see what's going on. So I already know my midline has been moved down. It's at negative 6.5. And I know that my amplitude is 2.5. So from my midline I'll go up 2.5 and I'll go down 2.5. So once I do that to get my two values, I see that my lowest value the graph gets to is negative 9. The highest value this graph gets to is negative 4, and so my range is going to be those values including negative 9 and negative 4. That's why I've used the square brackets. Okay, so let's take a look at one more example, and the next one I'll show you how to find the range more visually if you didn't like this sort of formula approach to it. Okay, so first up, let's describe the transformations, and I've switched the order around on you. That positive 3 is the number that's being added to this function, so that'll have the effect of moving the graph up 3, which really that's going to tell me where my midline of this graph is. The a value is the coefficient of sine or cosine, and again, because I can see that's negative this time, I have a graph that's been reflected or flipped over the x-axis. So there's the transformations. The amplitude, once again, is still just the a value. It's true whether it's sine or cosine. And remember, we ignore the sine or we do its absolute value. So the amplitude is 5. My graph is going to go up 5 and down 5 from the midline. Okay? So let's take a look at the range, and as promised, I'll do this one sort of graphically, visually, so we can see what's going on if you didn't like the formula. So I'm going to kind of start this as I would start any sketch. There's the first and fourth quadrants, the positive section, where I want my graph to appear. My midline is what I'm going to draw first. So let me count up 3 spaces. And that's sort of where this new center sort of my graph is going to be. And in the next video, we'll take a look at graphing some of these. So there's the midline. I also know from that midline, my amplitude is 5. So from there, I'm counting up 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops, I got off the scale a little bit. So I can count that up and see that, well, that's going to be at 8 up here, which will be the highest point my graph gets to. Also, let's count down 5 from there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or negative 2. And so that's the lowest my graph is going to get to. So to describe my range more visually, I can make this quick sketch or part of a sketch. Negative 2 is my lowest value. Positive 8 is my highest value. And that's going to describe the range of this function, all the values between negative 2 and positive 8.